Morning to all. Today's topic is sampling from the subject Legal Research Methodology. I, N.Umamaheswari, Assistant Professor of Law, Bharat Institute of Law, Bharat Institute of Higher Education and Research. Sampling. As the name suggests, sampling is a procedure to sample something. In layman terms, a sample is a part of a thing and it has the ability to display the qualities and the features of the thing of which it is a part. In other words, sample is a part of a thing that acts as a specimen or an example for that thing. For example, before launching a new soft drink in market, the company wants to test the consumer feedback for the product. The company may set up temporary vendors at an amusement park and let the consumers try the samples of the soft drink to collect their feedback. Each of those soft drinks will be called as sample. Sampling is the most important step in the direction of carrying out research. Once the hypothesis and objectives of the research are understood, sampling is a vital procedure in quantitative research, wherein the researcher first identifies the population to be studied. However, studying each and every item or member of the entire population is not only cumbersome and costly but also wasteful of time. Therefore, it is an accepted method to carve out a body of the items out of that population in such a way that the results derived from studying those items can be generalized to the whole population. This collective body of items that can be studied in the lieu of studying the entire population is called a sample. Sampling is a method or technique that is used to draw out a sample which reflects the qualities possessed by the population. The sampling may be defined as a method of picking out a representative sample from the population to be studied by using a definite technique. Technique is an essential thing while doing sampling because the sample that is taken must be appropriate in size as well as the features to be suitable for drawing inferences that can be generalized to the whole population. The first step in sampling is to determine the population to be studied. The next step is to ascertain the qualities of the population that the researcher wants to study. On the basis of qualities to be studied and the size of the population, the researcher can decide the appropriate proportional size of the sample. The qualities to be studied will also give the parameters for choosing a sample from the population. As has already been said that the sample must be representative of the whole population. The researcher must ensure that the qualities of the population to be studied are seen in the sample also. Sampling comes into the picture from the point of the research design itself. It helps in streamlining the part of research. Once the samples are fixed using a sampling technique, the collection of data from respondents becomes easier and cost effective. The researcher can collect data from a portion of the population only, that is, the sample, and at the same time, she can generalize the results arrived at. Sampling is a step Sampling is a step that has a bigger role in quantitative research than purely doctrinal research. Such a research in legal field is often called as socio-legal research because the researcher examines the execution of legal principles in society. For example, a socio-legal researcher wants to study the level of awareness of the consumer rights among the educated people in a city in Maharashtra, say Pune. Since Pune is a big city, he divides it into different areas and then proceeds. Since Pune is a big city, he divides it into different areas and then proceeds to determine the number of people he will approach for data collection in each of those areas. He first finds out the latest census information about the population in Pune and finds out a number that would proportionately represent the population. The researcher in this example can also randomly choose the respondents for his questionnaires, like the members of his family or his friends, neighbors, colleagues, etc. However, that will not establish the credibility of his mm, of his research because the respondents chosen according to the researcher's personal wish cannot yield a result that can be called an illustrative of the whole population. It is not possible to identify each and every unit to decide whether or not the unit should be a part of the sample. It is also ineffective to just randomly choose any group of population units and label them as sample. The researcher in this example can also randomly choose the respondents for his questionnaires, like the member of his family or his friends, neighbors, colleagues, etc. However, that will not establish the credibility of his research because respondents choose according to the researcher's personal wish cannot yield results that can be called illustrative of the whole population. It is not possible to identify each and every unit to decide whether or not the unit should be a part of the sample. It is also ineffective to just randomly choose any group of population units and label them as sample. There are certain techniques that have been developed by the researchers over time. There are also many practical and technical considerations to be kept in mind for choosing them sampling techniques. These techniques and enterprises associated with it will be dealt with in this chapter. Okay. What are the important terms that are being used while making a research? While making a sampling? There are some key terms that are associated with sampling. It has been discussed below. Universe. The first step in sampling is to identify and locate the population to be studied. Population, also called as universe, is the entire collection of people on whom the study is to be conducted. The people to be taken as population are decided on the basis of factors to be studied. For example, a study is proposed to assess the access to government provided amenities like electricity, water, etc. to people living in rural areas. The researcher proposes that the results of the study will be determined according to the response of the people receiving the amenities. Thus, the population or universe of the study will be the person living in rural areas of India. Let us further suppose the researchers want to conduct the research limited to a particular area of Chennai, then the population will be the resident of that area. Not only the factors but also the probability of obtaining data from the respondent is to be taken into consideration. For example, a study is proposed to assess the level of drug abuse among the teenage school going students in Madurai. The universe will have to include only teenagers who go to schools in Madurai. But in this study, it may be predicted by the researcher that obtaining honest and genuine responses from the school children is tricky. The researcher will have to expand the population size to include school authorities, parents of these school teenagers. For authentication of the study, the researcher may also include counselors who treat teenagers undergoing treatment for substance abuse. While making a choice of population for the study, it is important not only to narrow down the respondents on the basis of the aspects to be studied, but also by making speculation about the authenticity of the responses that shall be collected. Finite and infinite universe. Universe may be of two types, finite or infinite. A finite universe is one having a limited population or limited number of units. Infinite universe is one which has an unlimited interminable number of units, or the number of units is so large that it cannot be counted accurately. Thus, a study conducted in a particular educational institution or a fixed number of educational institutions will be considered to be having a finite population, while a study conducted on the entire population of a country is an indefinite universe. Generally, research studies conducted by individual researchers are conducted on finite universe. Infinite universe requires more time and is costly as it generally requires new number of field researchers. Heterogeneous and homogeneous universe. Universe is categorized as homogeneous and heterogeneous universe depending upon the consistency of the nature of elements present in it. Homogeneous population is one where the features of the units of the population are similar. Heterogeneous population is one where the population carries varying features. In research, homogeneity is seen in numbers in addition to in attributes, that is empirically as well as qualitatively. Thus, in sociological and socio-legal research, populations may be called as homogeneous, where the members of the group chosen for study are identical to one another. The population chosen for study is called heterogeneous if the members have different features. The homogeneity or heterogeneity of a population comes into question on quantitative basis of the distribution of members, that is, how scattered or clustered is the population. Homogeneity or heterogeneity may also be on the basis of attributes of members, that is, how similar or dissimilar is the population. It is important for the researcher to know the level of homogeneity of the population for choosing the most suitable sampling technique. On the basis of homogeneity of the population, the researcher chooses the sampling in such a manner that all the features of the population are well represented. All the features of the population are well represented in the sample. Sample. Once the population is fixed, the next step is to carve out a fixed portion out of a population for the purpose of the study. Sample is drawn out of the universe using sampling technique. The most important characteristics of a sample is that it should have all the distinguishing qualities of the universe. That is to say that even though the universe may have diverse and randomly distributed members, yet the sample should be chosen in such a manner that those aspects of the universe that are important for the study are not left out. A sample is always a subset of the universe. A sample is always a subset of the universe, that is, it may be smaller in size than the entire population, but the characteristics of the sample are same as that of the entire population. There might be a situation where the desired universe of the researcher may consist of haphazard units. In such a case, the sample must be chosen in such a manner that it consists of all the desired characteristics to be studied. Thus, representativeness is the most important characteristic of a sample. If care is not taken to ensure that the sample is not consisting of all the characteristics to be studied, then the results obtained may be illustrative, may not be illustrative. That puts a question on the validity of the research. The sample to be chosen must also represent the universe in a proportionate manner for substantial dependence on it for its results. Proportion in choosing the sample ensures maximum accuracy of the study results. Thus, the adequacy of the sample is another important characteristic of the sample. All the units selected to be included in the sample must be independent of each other's presence. That is to say, the inclusion of one unit in the sample must not be dependent on the inclusion of another unit. Sampling unit. Each entity or person or thing which forms the entire universe is called a sampling unit. It is the most basic thing in the universe from which data is to be collected. For example, in a study proposed for assessing the violation of human rights among the hand rickshaw pullers in the city of Kolkata, each of the rickshaw pullers is a sampling unit. Herein, the universe will be the entire body of the rickshaw pullers in Kolkata. In some studies, more than one sample is drawn out of the universe for making a sound research. In such cases, each body of unit is called as unit and the entities or persons from whom the data is collected are called sampling elements. For example, a dish TV company wants to conduct a study to gather feedback from families that have subscribed to the dish connection. The universe is located in a particular area composed of different societies. Each family who have subscribed to the connection is a sampling element. Group of families located in one society will be the sampling units. Sampling tried. As we understood above, samples are drawn out of the universe based on the attributes and factors to be studied. Each of these factors or characteristics that govern the process of sampling are called as sampling traits. Sampling traits may be qualitative or quantitative depending on the nature and the requirement of the study. Qualitative traits are the unchangeable features, example, religion of person, gender of person, etc. These traits cannot be categorized into a range or scale. Quantitative traits are varying like income of family, crime rate in an area, pollution level, etc. In research, quantitative traits are also called variables as they change and can more easily be divided into range. Target population. All the units present in the universe cannot be the target of the study, as has already been mentioned above. The researcher has to choose to include in his sample only those units that mark the characteristics to be studied by the researcher. Thus, in the above example of a study of drug abuse among the school children in the region of Madurai, the teenage students of the school are the population, while only students who have suffered from or are suffering from the drug abuse problems are included in the target population. Sample size. Deciding the size of a sample is a major concern for a researcher. Size of the sample is the total number of the sampling units that the researcher will include in the sample. The sample size cannot be too huge because then the whole purpose of studying a sample rather than the whole universe is lost. The sample size cannot be too small that it does not adequately represent the universe population. Bias the sample. Even after taking utmost care, it is possible that a sample chosen by a researcher represents some characteristics of the population more than the others. Such a sample is called a biased sample. It is important for the researcher to be aware and make sure that his sample is not biased to avoid sampling errors as well as to authenticate his research. Such a situation may not always arise due to the carelessness of the researcher but also due to the constraints to choose from the population. For example, a study may require for collecting the responses from the residents in an area where there are people of one religion living together in clusters. So if the researcher does not take care he may end up with a sample that contains more respondents from one religion and that may lead to bias in his research results. Sampling types of sampling. There are mainly three kinds of sampling. Let us understand these kinds of sampling. Probability sampling, where the sample is chosen in such a manner that all the elements present in the universe have an equal chance of being represented in the sample, then it is called a probability sampling. Sampling technique that comes under the probability sampling are used in the cases where population is homogeneous. Homogeneous means the features of the characteristics of the population is similar. In probability sampling, all the units of this universe have an equal chance of being included in the sample. And when the population is homogeneous, there is no risk of missing out on any aspect of the population. For conducting probability sampling, it is imperative to know the size of the universe and the complete list of the units in it. Also, the researcher must decide the size of the desired sample beforehand. Non-probability sampling. In non-probability sampling, all the units do not stand a chance to be included in the sample. Non-probability sampling does not guarantee representativeness. It is also called as a decisive sampling or purposive sampling, as the basis of sampling is the free will of the researcher. Purposive sampling is used where the size of the universe is unknown or indefinable. It is often repeated and established practice to use purposive sampling where the objective of the research is qualitative analysis and descriptive or exploratory. Mixed sampling. There are sampling techniques which do not fall under the above two mentioned categories strictly. These techniques displays some characteristics of a probability sampling and some characteristics of a non-probability sampling. Such a sampling technique may be called as mixed sampling. Probability sampling is further divided into the following types: random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, multi-stage sampling. Probability sampling. In this method, it is possible to state in advance the probability that any given unit will be included in the sample. Once such probability model is set up, a mechanical procedure is devised to select elements from the population. The probability model is set up having in mind the type of the universe, the characteristics of the units, The objectivity of the study. This method has the advantage of elimination of human bias in sampling. The sampling error in this method can be estimated. The random error decreases as the sample size increases. Through this method, we can always get a good estimate of population. Estimates which are unbiased, consistent, efficient, and sufficient are called good estimates. Statistical techniques can be used to test the hypothesis. The following are the probability sampling methods. Random sampling. A simple random sample is selected in such a way that each person in the universe has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. The method of drawing a random sample are generally of four types: lottery method, random numbers, grid system, selection from a sequential list. What is meant by lottery method? The number or names of various units of the universe are written on the chits. Place them in a container, thoroughly shuffle, and blindly draw one sheet at a time until the sample is drawn. We can do this with the replacement of the sheets drawn before the next draw and a draw is made. If the units selected or not replaced before the next draw, the sample obtained is called a simple random sampling without representation. Okay, there may be several practical difficulties in this procedure if the universe is very large. This procedure would be theoretically inapplicable if the universe is not finite. Random numbers. Certain statistical tools are being available, like LHC Tippett constructed a list of 10,400 sets of four-digit numbers written at random at every stage. They have been constructed out of 41,600 digits taken from a census report by combining them in four. The method of drawing out the sample from the Tippett's number consisting of the following steps: identifying n units in the population with the number I to n, select at random any page of the random number table and pick up the numbers in any row, column, or diagonal at random. The units corresponding to the numbers selected constitute the random sample. There are some other techniques used or Fisher and Yates table of random numbers also used while making a random sampling in the method of random numbers. Selection from the sequential list. Under this plan, the names of the universe are first arranged serially according to some particular order, which may be alphabetical, geographical, or simply serial. Then, out of the list, every 10 or any other number of the cases may be taken up. Starting may be made with any number. For example, if every 10th unit is to be selected, the selection may begin from 7 and go on to the 17, 27, 37, 47, and so on. Grid system. It is used for selecting a sample of area. According to this method, map of the entire area is prepared. Then a screen with the squares is placed upon the map. Some of the squares are selected at random. Stratified systematic sampling. What is really systematic sampling? Systematic sampling requires that a population be accurately listed in such a way that each element of the population can be uniquely identified by its order. A systematic sample consists of the selection of each term from the list. Here, the sample is selected at every sampling interval. This method has an advantage over random sampling if the neighboring observations resembles one another. This method serves almost the same purpose as stratification in distributing the sampling units more evenly over the entire population. Stratified random sampling. In this method, the population is first divided into a number of strata based on some characteristics such as age, sex, educational level, etc. Then a simple random is taken from each stratum and such samples are brought together to form the total sample. Here, the population will be of heterogeneous nature. In order to collect a sample, the strata has been determined on the basis of the homogeneous characteristics of the sampling unit. While simple random sample is quite representative, a stratified random sample is still more perfectly representative. Okay, what does mean by cluster sampling or subsampling? A sampling procedure in which the sampling unit is a cluster of elements, and after selecting a sample, the cluster information is collected on each element in the sampled cluster is called as cluster sampling. For example, for selecting burglars for study, we select some jails in each state by random sampling method. and the information is collected from each buckler kept in the jig. It is a type of sampling in which the clusters of units are selected instead of elementary units. The sampling of clusters from the population is done by simple or stratified random sampling methods. From these selected clusters, the constituent elements are sampled out. What are the advantages of a cluster sampling? When a sampling frame of all elements is not available, we can resort only to the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is economically cheaper, there will be saving of time, the field work period will be lesser. The disadvantage of cluster samplings are the efficiency of cluster sampling is lesser compared to sampling by elements. Due to unequal size of the clusters, building of estimates are somewhat difficult. Usually, the elements within a cluster are similar. As such, in cluster sampling, cross-section of the population represented in the sample is less. Multi-stage sampling. It is a method of subsampling in each sampled cluster, a sampling technique in which we first take a sample of cluster and then do subsampling in sampled cluster is known as multi-stage sampling. It is an advancement over the cluster sampling method. This design is used for sampling in large scale surveys. Non-probability sampling. As non-probability sampling, in this technique, the sample is not based on the probability with which a unit can enter the sample, but by the other considerations such as common sense, experience, intention, and expertise of the sampler. The main defect of such sample is that they are biased samples. One of the following techniques represents the non-probability sampling or representative sampling, judgment sampling, accident sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling. Representative sampling. This sampling technique is based on intuition, and common sense, but not on probability. The sample selected in general represents characteristics variables and may not represent the universe with respect to other variables. There will be bias and this can never be determined and there is no way of applying statistical techniques to get a good estimate of population characteristics. Before selecting a representative sample, a researcher should take the following precautions. The size of the sample must be large enough so that it can provide sufficient scope for various kinds of items to be selected. Sampling should not be done purposively. Sampling should not be done by perfect stratified method. The source list must be up to date and complete. The researcher should not be prejudiced or biased at the time of selecting the sample. Judgment sampling. In this method, the researcher selects the units to form his sample on his judgment. Due to bias, good estimate cannot be prepared by this type of sampling. Only an experienced researcher could do this in a justified way. Accident sampling. In this method, the researcher selects any case he comes across. In this, it is not possible to know whether the sample is representative or not as they give preference to the cases which come first. Purposive sampling. According to Adolf Jensen, a purposive selection denotes the method of selecting a number of groups of units in such a way that selected groups together yield as nearly as possible the same average or proportion as a totality with respect of those characteristics which are already a matter of statistical knowledge. In purposive selection, the researcher deliberately or purposefully selects the cases. The following are the essential features of a purposive selection. The purposive sample should possess representativeness. To achieve representativeness, the sample should have the following criteria. Different variables are in the same proportion both in the sample as well as in the universe. The frequency distribution of the sample and the universe may be similar. The average of sample should tally with the average of universe. Variables of the sample and the universe is the same. The sample must possess a complete idea of the nature of the universe. The sample should be free from bias. Advantages of purposive samplings are proper care will be taken in selecting the sample. The purposive sampling is at times is very cheap. It is more useful, especially when some of the units are very important and must be included. Care can be taken to keep out any bias. What are the disadvantages of a purposive sampling? The knowledge of the population may not be available. The control are often effective and a biased sample is selected. Estimates of the sampling errors rest upon hypotheses which are seldom met in practice. Convenience sampling is another type of non-probability sampling. Sample is selected according to the convenience of the investigator. Self-selected sampling is also another type. Selection of sample is made among the samples that was selected. Quota sampling. In this method, some other forms of sampling are quota sampling. Some other methods of sampling are quota sampling. In this method, both stratification and judgment is used. In this type, samples of prefixed size are taken from each stratum of the universe using judgment sampling method. Advantages of quota sampling are it derives the benefits of stratification without the high field cost. There is no necessity to use much technical knowledge. Freedom is there to enumerate to select the samples. The estimates can be obtained quickly and cheaply. The service of the enumerators can be easily exploited. What are the disadvantages of a quota sampling? Theory of sampling cannot be applied to quota sampling. Information about the precision of estimates through this method cannot be obtained. The reliability of the estimate is not known. It is dangerous to use this method without sufficient experience. Area sampling. In area sampling, small areas are designated as sampling unit and the household to be interviewed will be selected if they are found in a canvas of this designed small areas. Sampling by regular intervals. Another procedure is to select the cases at regular intervals from the series, alphabetical list, or any other arbitrary agreements. These are the types of samplings. Thank you all.